glad you guys are here tonight, and we're kicking off a brand new series. You know, I wonder about a lot of things in life. Probably you can relate. I wonder, probably, I'm a thinker, so I spend probably way too much time wondering about things in general. I wonder about the different things in life that would make life better, about, I wonder why things are the way that they are. I wonder, why does Taco Bell constantly change their menu and get rid of their really good items just as I'm getting accustomed to getting them on a regular basis? Like their value menu, why does that keep getting worse, right? I guess the spicy potato soft taco will do for a while longer. What makes a person go 10 miles under the speed limit, right? How many of you drive? And how many of you, even from the passenger seat, you can't stand to be behind somebody who's like going slower than you feel you should be going on the road that you're on? Yeah, it's not fun. I wonder all kinds of things, like how can we carry supercomputers in our pockets, yet printers are still the size of like 3 people? Right? In our office, the copy room, there's like half of it is taken up by a copy machine and a printer. So why can't we make those a little bit smaller and reliable? That's the key, because if they're smaller, they tend to be unreliable. Is that anybody else's experience? Even if they're bigger, they're sometimes unreliable. But I wonder a lot of things. Why does Franklin not get a Chick-fil-A already? Right? This amen. This is God's chicken we're talking about here. So I wonder about a lot of things, but in all seriousness, if you guys are with me, you can kind of, we all wonder about the big questions in life as well, don't we? We wonder about the things that really matter, like, why are we here? Right? Maybe if you subscribe to Christianity or another ideology that gives you a purpose, then you can kind of answer your way as to why you're here. But when it comes down to like how and why really are we here? And who decides why we're here? Is it up to me and what I choose, or is it chosen for me? Or maybe why? Not only why are we here, but is my existence maybe a big coincidence? Or maybe you believe that there's a God, and so maybe it's not so much coincidence that bothers you, but maybe why at this point in time in history instead of any other time? Anybody ever wonder that? Sometimes I sit there and I'm like, what would I have been like had I been born like in the 1500s? Like, I just, something I wonder, is God actually real? Like, that might be something some of you are wrestling with, or certainly your friends are wrestling with. Does our faith in things like the Bible conflict with the scientific realities that we currently know about our world today? That's a big one. I'm an analytical person, so I like to ask all the questions. I like to dig deep. I like to find my answers. I found great answers. I found terrible answers. And I'm not just here to share all of them with you, but I am here to share a few insights that I think would be super helpful. And as we continue in this series, we're going to go about a layer deeper. So think about this 3-week series as one message, okay? So you have to think about it like this week is part 1 of 3. The next week is part 2, and which if you've seen Star Wars, you know, The Empire Strikes Back is the best one. It's the second one of the trilogy. We were just talking about this at dinner earlier, so it's fact. But you go further and further into this series. We'll get a little bit deeper. We'll also make it a little bit more applicable, come at things from a few different angles. So I encourage you to, even if you can't physically be here, make sure you catch up online when you miss, because I think this is one of the things, this whole topic we're going to be talking about in this series is one of the biggest reasons that people walk away from their faith. They haven't thought through some of the deeper questions until they're faced with it, and it shatters their reality. Do you know people like that, or have seen people like that? I certainly have. But the other reason people tend to walk away from faith is not necessarily intellectual, but it's emotional. Why would God allow this to happen? We're not going to get into that one so much this series, but that is coming later this year. We're going to talk about, on an intellectual level, how do we love God with our minds? When it comes to some of the deeper questions, when it comes to some of the things like we've mentioned, how do we allow our faith and things like science coexist? How do they go together, and do they hurt each other? Do they benefit one another? We all wonder these things because we're curious creatures. We all wonder because we're curious, you know, and it's a good thing. We're created that way. Curiosity is kind of like an emotion, and we're built with them. We experience all kinds of emotions, and curiosity is one that is a driving force for many of our questions and in our decision making. So we're going to talk about this. If we can find answers to the things that we wonder about the most, a lot of times we believe we'll find clarity on what we need. And sometimes that's a good thing, obviously, but we've got to be careful going down that path, because No matter how much you know about something, you will never have the answers to everything. There will always be lingering questions. So that's kind of what we're going to get into a little bit today. But our curiosity ultimately leads us to many routes in finding the answers that we're searching for. How many of you have Googled something recently because you had a question about something? And so it's easy to just whip out that phone, look up your answer, and sometimes it's a good answer, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't really need the best answer, you need an answer. How many of you, it was for homework? You had to look up something to put down on your homework. I wish I had that tool when I was your age. I technically was around, but I didn't have a smartphone. I couldn't just look it up. I had to actually go to a physical box computer and look up my question. And I didn't have internet in my house until my senior year of high school. So even then, I was hardly ever at home. But curiosity, it leads us to those answers that we're searching for. It's like, why is the world full of religions that promise to be the right one? And how do you differentiate which one really is? It's why it's so trendy right now to explore all the ways that you can be spiritual without being religious. Have you guys noticed that trend? How can you elevate yourself spiritually in enlightenment without being tied to any religion? Like balancing your energy, using crystals. Have you guys seen some of this stuff? It's kind of crazy where people will go to find the answers for some of the things that they're searching for. It's why science has sparked so many debates about what is true and what is not. And often, science and faith get presented to us in our society as if they conflict with one another, as if you have to choose one. Pick science or pick your fairy tale. And there's a lot of language that speaks to that in our culture today, but sometimes it can feel like Christianity and curiosity cannot coexist, because to admit you don't know the answer to something feels like you're wrong about it then. Can you relate? Somebody asks you a question, or you've heard a question asked, and you don't know the answer, you automatically feel like, oh, well, then I don't know enough. Or, oh, I must be wrong because I don't have an answer for that. And that's a tough tension to really kind of balance, but it's a real one that each and every one of us balance, sometimes without even realizing it. But there are a lot of ways to talk about faith. And when I say faith in this series, what I mean is faith is a confidence in God and who He is. And that informs how we live. So faith is a confidence in who God is, and that informs the way that we live. That's what we mean when we're talking about faith. Now, we all have faith in all kinds of things every single day, sometimes without even thinking about it. How many of you guys drove here tonight? How many of you had your parents drive you here tonight? How many of you lacked faith that the vehicle you were in would get you to this building? Most of us probably not. How many of you have faith when you sat down this evening that the chair you were sitting in was not going to collapse? There's 3 broken chairs over there to say otherwise. Yet most of you had faith that you could sit down in these chairs and no harm would befall you, right? We put our faith in all kinds of things. The doctor writes you a prescription. You have faith that it's going to do what the doctor says it will. Namely, it'll get rid of your symptoms that you so wish to eliminate. Maybe it will. Maybe it will cause other issues that you didn't think about. Who knows? You put your faith in a lot of things. I could go on and on and on and on. We put our faith in things all the time, but just because we put our faith in something doesn't mean that we lack reason to put our faith in those things. Most of you probably, how many of you have ever walked into this room, sat in a chair, and then fell to the ground because the chair was unstable? One hand, and you've been here a long time, right? So that means for most of you, if you've been here any number of weeks, you've been here repeatedly, and it's not happened to you, therefore you had reason, your faith was justified, that you could sit in the seat you're sitting in. Some of you, if this is your first time here, maybe you came with somebody who gave you the confidence that you could sit there. Maybe you didn't even think about it. Most of you probably didn't. The reality is we put our faith in things not because we believe in fairy tales or because faith is unreasonable, but because we have a certain degree of certainty when it comes to the things we put our faith in. And Christianity is no different. And science doesn't conflict with our religious beliefs. So when we talk about faith, we're talking about specifically a confidence that is in who God is, and that informs us how we live. That's what we mean when we're talking about faith. So oftentimes it feels like science is searching for certainty, right? Science seems like the verifiably proven fact that something is real. And by definition, like science is like, the scientific method when you were in like 6th grade and started learning about that, right? Where what's the first thing you do in the scientific method? I know some of you are science nerds. What is it? Ask a question. Okay. Form a hypothesis. Research and test your hypothesis. What's next? You analyze, right? You analyze the results of the testing of your hypothesis that was posed by a question, and then you have your conclusion. And then you fine-tune the test, make another hypothesis, and run more tests. And then the process repeats. And each time, hopefully, you do a little experiment, but science by definition has to have, in order to be tested, you have to be able to repeat it and prove it multiple times, right? You guys familiar with these concepts? But just because you do that once doesn't mean you have a definite answer. It means that your hypothesis was either proven correct or incorrect to a certain degree. And then you keep testing and repeat the process. But pretty certain that like gravity works, right? That's pretty testable and repeatable. So that we can have a degree of certainty, but the more we dig into things, the more that we learn about them, the more we realize there is to learn. It's like there's this curve. Like when you are introduced to a new topic, like how many of you have gotten into like some crazy topic on YouTube and you just start learning a lot about something and you watch like 5 videos and you think, I know everything. So the graph goes up to here, like from 0 down here, and you go up, and I guess it's mirrored. So you guys are thinking right to left. So you got the graph, and if you start down here, then suddenly like, oh, I know everything. And then the more that you study it, the more you realize how much you don't know. And then it kind of plateaus, and it kind of slowly, gradually goes up from there. But at the very beginning, you get this spike in the graph of how much you learn, how much you think you know, until you realize how much you don't know. And then it's just a gradual process of learning and discovering all over again. It's that way when it comes to Bible knowledge, the faith. When you learn mathematics, when you learn science, whatever it is, this is true in every field. So the humble attitude would say, how much do I not know? How much can I be certain of what I do know? And what are the things I'm putting my faith in? This is why often it feels like for many people, science and faith can't coexist, because science is the testable, repeatable, provable studies of something, and faith is a belief in an abstract idea like God, who you can't physically see in person. Obviously, as Christians, we don't believe it's abstract, but for most people, when they think about faith, that's why like prayer, it seems like untangible, because like you can understand a conversation with a physical human being, but when you come into the realm of faith and you talk about a conversation with a God you can't see, it suddenly feels very abstract and not so testable. And therefore, it feels like things like science and faith can't exist. But they can. And that's what we're going to talk about in the series, how faith and science can coexist. So in order to do that, I think it's important to go back to the very beginning, and not the beginning of the debates between science and faith, but to the beginning of the world in and of itself. And as Christians, we believe in a document that the Jewish people also believe in, which is the document of Genesis, which is a historical narrative by genre. And when you read it, you see somebody telling the story of how the world came to be. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of this later. I know some people have questions about this, but for today's conversation, we're going to start with just the very simple phrase of Genesis 1:1, which says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this sentence often gets a lot of Christians and scientists into debates because we start asking the how question. But science is trying to talk about the how. The historical narrative of Genesis is trying to tell us a different story. In other words, it's not trying to tell us how the world was made. It's saying that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In other words, it's not so much about how it happened. It's about who was behind it. And you can get into the debates of how it happened, how the world came to be. But for the sake of our time right now, we're not really going to get into a whole lot of that. We will come back to that later in this series, so stay tuned for that. But this one sentence that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It's been a topic of curiosity for a long time. What different views on the way the world was created have you learned or heard about or maybe even considered yourself? So take a minute, think about that. What different views on the way the world was created have you learned or heard about or maybe even considered for yourself? For some of you, this stuff really does not matter to you. In fact, this conversation annoys you because you'd rather get to something else. Others of you get stuck on this line of thinking. And especially if you're like me, you're analytical and you want to know the answers to everything. But again, there's a lot of debate about this, but science ultimately is the pursuit of understanding our world. And our faith has to do with understanding our world, but not necessarily the how that is behind everything. A lot of times, people will walk away from the faith because they think the Bible is meant to do something that it's not actually trying to do. Namely, tell you how things work, whereas the Bible is trying to tell you who is behind all things. And that informs the way that we live. And we get into that the deeper we read into Scripture. But this is what's really cool. Is the more we learn about science and the understanding of our world, you'll find that it actually informs our faith in a lot of ways. It does not have to be in conflict with the Bible. It doesn't have to be in conflict with your faith in God or in Jesus. But check out this verse. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37. Many of you have heard it, especially you growing up at church, but it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your what? With your what? With your mind. In other words, you don't have to check your mind at the door. You don't have to check your intellect at the door when you walk into Christianity. You don't have to just take everything by a blind faith. Like I mentioned earlier, you have reason for faith. You have reason for the things you believe. And again, we're going to get deeper into some of those things. But faith is getting to know the God that is behind it all. And I believe the more that you learn about science, the more you learn about the world around us, the more things just point to a creator. The more it points to God. The more it actually can strengthen and expand your faith and your understanding of how complex that God really is. So as you explore science, your faith, again, can expand, which is pretty cool. In fact, if you study astronomy at all, have you guys heard like the universe is constantly expanding? You heard, like, it's kind of cool. So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. The more you study something, the more you learn about it. The next day you can look, things have expanded more, you learn more. Scientists to this day have not been able to definitively tell you how many stars and how many galaxies exist in our universe, because it goes on and on and on and on, and it's constantly expanding. And so the more we understand, the more there is for us to learn, to understand. And the more that we understand, the more there is to understand. It just keeps going and going, and our knowledge expands as our universe expands, but the same is true with our faith. The more we learn about the faith that we live, the faith in our God, the more that we learn about Him, the more that expands as well. Science and faith go hand in hand. What you'll find the more you study this topic is that it's a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of worldview. If you want to prove a world without God, you can try to do it. It takes a certain degree of faith. And the more that you try to prove a God behind all things, the more you'll be able to do it, but you won't be certain. Neither will be certain. Both will require faith. And as you explore science, if you view it with the mindset that there is a God behind all of it, holding all things together, the more you will be able to, that you will see the world that you study, and it will increase your faith in Him. And so, as you explore science, that's why as Christians we're not afraid of our curiosity. We're not afraid of getting answers. Some of you, I know, you might yourself or have friends that were too scared to get some of their questions answered for fear that it might destroy their faith. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. You're putting something against each other that doesn't have to be in conflict with one another. Science is a piece of the puzzle of the world that we live in, but it is not everything, because science cannot study, test, repeat, and prove things like love and compassion, because those are ideas, those are abstracts. But we know they exist. We can see the effects of them. We know when there is a lack of one of them. And so, try not to put all your eggs in the basket of science, because even science will fall short of meeting all of your curiosities. And that's okay. In fact, one of the greatest scientists who ever lived, who was also a Christian, Albert Einstein, he said this. He said, the most beautiful experience we can have is mysterious. It's the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and science. Whoever does not know it can no longer wonder, no longer marvel, is as good as dead, and his eyes are dimmed. And that's pretty incredible if you think about that. In other words, what he's saying is curiosity and mystery is essential for us wanting to learn more. And it's essential to push us towards greater learning. And as soon as all our curiosity is met, we don't care. We stop learning. We stop growing. So curiosity is a good thing. And so the same is true with our faith. As we come to try to approach a world that thinks scientifically, we don't have to be afraid of that. We don't have to run from that. I might have misspoke. I can't remember if Albert Einstein was a Christian or not, but there were plenty of other Christians throughout history who were leaders in the scientific world. Isaac Newton, Galileo, many of them, you can study them. But all that to say that you don't have to be afraid of having to separate your faith from the science that you want to study or the world around us. So my challenge for you to, one, be curious, be committed to always feeding your curiosity and looking for answers for the questions that you have. Second, embrace wonder and mystery. Like, those are powerful tools. God is a mystery we'll never understand, but the more we get to know him, the more fulfilled our life will become. So embrace wonder and mystery. That it's okay to just sit and think about the things you don't understand. It's fun to think about how wondrous our world is and to feed our learning that way. So the third thing kind of ties in with that, keep learning. As you learn and as your mind expands, continue to do so. Make that a lifelong journey. And lastly, the last piece of this is to expand your faith as well. As you continue learning about the world around us, continue also to learn about your faith, about the things that God has for you, of what he's revealed in his word, and keep expanding your faith. As you explore science, your faith can expand. And in this series, we're going to be talking a little more in the weeds on some of that. Some of the stuff we won't have time to get into in our gatherings, but we will be posting some stuff on YouTube, so make sure you are following that if you are not already. And as we get ready to go to groups, I want you to think about this question. How can science and faith begin to work together in your own life? If you've thought about that and you got an answer, great. If you've not thought about that before, consider how science and faith can begin to work together in your own life to not only expand the way that you see the world, but to expand your faith in God. Let me pray, and then we'll go to our small groups.